The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado, and with me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
I don't want to oversell things to you, TJ, but today we are talking to the foremost expert of the overlap of sexuality and Enneagram, and I'm sure she'll verify that I am not speaking falsehoods because she seems humble. Maybe you have a self-promoting bug. Am I not wrong, Dr. Sam?
You're making me feel awkward. Yes and no, sort of. Everything I know from combined work of myself and my colleagues.
I say that counts.
Well, I do a lot of research, and when it comes to the overlap of sexuality and Enneagram, yours is routinely the go-to name. So I'm thrilled that you made time for us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about yourself, Sam.
Sure. I am a sexuality researcher, sort of by training, and that's how I see myself. Although I'm not doing so much research now today, I'm doing more coaching and counseling work. So I'm also an Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality and intimacy and relationships. And my doctoral research focused on the overlap of Enneagram type and instinct with patterns of sexual desire and expression.
That's excellent. For those who don't know, which would include me,
And me.
would you be willing to give us just a basic definition for sexuality?
Oh my God. That's such an unreasonable request.
Summarize quantum theory in 12 words or less?
Yeah.
It can't be defined, basically. But what I can tell you is the way I looked at it. So what I looked at primarily was sexual desire. And the way I define sexual desire in my study, again, that cannot be easily defined by anyone, but it's a discrete experience, internal experience of I was just about to use desire in the definition. You can't do that. A discrete experience of wants and needs, ideas, fantasies around sexuality that's discrete and different from actually behaving sexually. So we'll get into this, I'm sure, but a good amount of types have, for example, a lot of desire that they're not actualizing. Other types are more likely to actualize all the desire they feel. So desire is discrete from sexual behavior and sexual expression. So it's an internal experience of sexuality, wants, needs, fantasies, etc.
I want to make a clarification for us to start off. I love the idea of this as an internal experience. Would it be fair to say that we're going to be talking mostly about mental emotional realm then when talking about sexuality in this conversation, or do you want to bring in physical dynamics to sexuality as well?
I wouldn't say it's mental and emotional only, because there's a huge portion of our internal experience of sexuality that is physical, but that is physical within ourselves. So body sensations, emotions, thoughts, and our sort of our spiritual aspect, our essential, our essence aspect also. So all four of those things before we even get near another person. So yes, it's fair to say that we'd be talking mostly about people's internal experiences, but not just mental and emotional. It's physical and essential also.
You're saying a lot of the things that I wanted to pivot toward, but can you go further and just say what can be said about sexuality outside of copulating and intercourse?
You're killing me with these extremely broad questions on which we could teach several college courses.
I'm a philosopher. I'm all about definitions. You got to clarify your terms so that we can get this sucker nailed down and find the right answer, one that I am.
I don't know if there's a right answer. So much can be said about sexuality. I mean, if you were alone on a desert island for your whole life, would you or would you not have a sexuality? Like, you don't need other people to have a sexuality.
And honestly, we could just talk about that question for the next hour and a half.
What have I done to myself?
Don't worry, we're not going to.
Well, unfortunately, my next question is going to be even more complex. So you've gotten into Enneagram and you've been studying sexuality. What are a couple of the big ideas that have really hit you when you pair those two studies?
In terms of the overlap of Enneagram
In
and
terms of the
sexuality,
overlap, yeah.
there's so much there. It's really such a rich area for exploration that surprisingly most folks in the Enneagram world hadn't been doing before.
Shocking.
Yeah, before myself and some of my other colleagues who were researching it simultaneously with me before we kind of started working with it. But I think an important takeaway is that there are discernible patterns of sexual desire by type. So based on the type someone is, I can sort of predict in the research the way that they will express how often they want to behave sexually with a partner, for example, the types of what's called desire cues. So, like the types of things that make them feel sexual desire, what those will be, and how sexually assertive they are, which are the 3 key things that I measured. And there are also discernible patterns by instinct, the 3 instincts. And a key takeaway that I've ended up finding through my research, but also through my work with Lindsay Fraser, who's a sex therapist, and a whole group of our colleagues that we, have met with on and off through the past couple of years, is that Enneagram instinct is kind of more at the depth of what influences sexuality. It sets the framework for how we interpret sexuality. And the type is more related to the nuances of the things that we like and dislike, how assertive we are, those types of things. But it's really the instinct that's more associated with that animal part of the brain that seems to be really defining in terms of how people are sexual.
May I quickly clarify some stuff on that front? Just for new listeners, if you haven't gotten into the instincts, there's something that's just come up quite a bit, and I suppose here are my definitions, so clarify if I miss. There's a big idea going on in Enneagram circles as well as elsewhere, suggesting that our social energies go one of 3 dominant ways. Our social energies go toward the group, our social energies go towards an individual, or our social energies point first towards our self, and that this has a huge effect on our behavior and how we experience ourselves in the world, specifically socially. Am I missing anything there in terms of the definitions?
I see it pretty differently, but not contradicting what you said. Yeah. I sort of teach the instincts, and in terms of our research and work, with the sexuality, it demonstrates this as well, that they're sort of an evolutionary adaptation. Mm-hmm. So that the self-preservation instinct is kind of the hunter-gatherer instinct. So the instinct to get food and water and shelter and warmth and tend to the needs of the body. And then the social instinct is the tribal cohesion instinct. So the health of the tribe, the wellness of the tribe, and the members of the tribe. Is everyone okay? Is anyone sick? Do we need to take care of them? Is anyone unhappy? What's my role in the tribe? Are people happy with me? How am I seen? What am I contributing? All of that. And then the sexual instinct is more associated with the reproductive or mating instinct. Of course, now people will tell you the sexual instinct's not about sex. It sort of is and isn't. But that drive to follow passion or chemistry, and like the depth or intensity of connection would be the sexual instinct realm. The only part I maybe would disagree with your definitions, Jeff, was around the group versus one-to-one. So often social instinct dominant people do prefer to connect one-on-one. So it's not just about that. In a group, a social instinct dominant person is always going to attend to everyone in the group. They're going to be aware of everyone in the group, but they often find that exhausting because they're using their energy for that. So they often actually prefer to connect one-on-one. But for sexual instinct dominance, it's about going to this depth and intensity kind of chemical connection that social instinct dominants aren't as interested in. I hope that helps and doesn't make it more confusing.
Well, it does help to me, but I also think it's a good demonstration of the reality that like instincts are complicated and they muddy the water. And so if it's very confusing already, then maybe do some research on the instincts first. But taking just this particular angle of looking at the instincts with sexuality in mind, like there's there's ways that we're going to talk about the instincts that are going to be different than if we weren't talking about sexuality.
For sure.
Yeah.
The thing that TJ should have said, push into your 3, boss, is we did an entire summer on instinct. So if you want to study this, please just go back through our catalog and spend time looking at it if this is a new topic for you.
See,
and
I don't even
back
remember
to this
that
episode.
That's
So I
so
think
long
it's a lack
ago?
of self-promotion. You have past tools. I think you're a liar. I want to talk about the gifts and challenges of these instincts. It seems like when coming to sexuality that there's some things that the dominant instincts are going to provide you that really are a benefit, and then there's things that are going to be challenging. And I would be super curious what your framework for talking about that would look like, if we can go there. And just because they're first on my list here, you want to, like, for somebody who is dominant in their self-pres instinct, what are they going to bring most as a gift to the sexual relationships that they have?
I love that question. I feel like it's not usually asked to me in that way, and that's such a nice way to look at it. So some of the gifts of the self-preservation dominant would be they have a lot of perspective. So if, for example, someone is in a long-term monogamous relationship where sexuality and sexual connection is going to wax and wane based on the circumstances and so many things, self-preservation dominants bring a lot of perspective to that. They understand that happens and they don't freak out about it. They can really hold like the long-term vision of the relationship and just know that, okay, we might not be connecting sexually right now, but we will again, we have before. So they can kind of prevent the panic that social instinct dominants and sexual instinct dominants have when there's those low ebb times, especially in longer relationships. I'd say that's their main gift.
That's lovely. Do you have thoughts on that, Teach?
Allowing for ebbs and flows and all of that. Like, is there an element of taking care of oneself?
Yeah,
for
totally.
Now, and when we reconnect, that's great.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the other gift I wanted to say for self-preservation dominance, is that they have a really, usually, depends on trauma and things like that, but they usually have a pretty firm grasp on the fact that sexuality lives within themselves, not just in the relational space. And social and sexual instinct dominants can miss out on that depending on their instinctual stacking and a bunch of other things. So self-preservation dominants often will do more solo sexual practice because, for one, it's a lower output of energy and they are very energy conscious. And for another, they, like you said, TJ, they can kind of understand, like, okay, well, I'm not having a lot of partnered sex right now. No problem. I have these physical needs. I'm just going to take care of them. And they just don't read into that too much usually. So that's another of their gifts.
Is that going to be influenced at all by types? Let's talk about self-pres dominant types. You have, the actual Enneagram types overlapping here. Do you find that across all 9 types, the observation that that's how the energy is expressed?
Yes, definitely. I think we were all surprised, myself and my research, and then Lindsay and our other colleagues were all surprised by how influential instinct is. Type does matter a lot. I don't know if we'd have to have probably a second interview just on type, but it's going to bring the nuance in terms of, for example, a self-preservation 8 is going to speak up way sooner if they have an issue with how sexuality is going. And a self-preservation 9 is probably never going to say anything about how they feel about how their sexual life is going. But in both cases, they have that tendency to have more perspective and that tendency to understand and feel that sexuality is within themselves as well as with the partner.
On the other front, then, Sam, what do you see as challenges for self-pres types?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main one has to do with context. So something myself and Lindsay talk about a lot is that sexual desire is happening within the self, and then the ability to actualize that into sexual behavior depends on how easily you can move through context. And context is just what's happening in your life. So context is everything from how many dishes are in the sink to how many kids you have to how stressful your job is to how well you slept last night. So our big challenge for self-preservation dominant people is they have the most difficult time moving through contexts into actualizing their desire with a partner, even if they want to. If they feel really stressed out, if they didn't sleep well, they feel a cold coming on, they're hungry, they're cold, they're too warm, almost anything having to do with the comfort of the body and the life, you're stressed about money, anything, that often makes it really difficult for them to move into sexual behavior, even if they feel that desire. So that's their biggest challenge.
Do you see that issue playing out with intelligence center in mind? So like 8s, 9s, and 1s might be more in tune with physical scenarios, like didn't sleep well enough, too hot, too cold, those kinds of things. 5s, 6s, and 7s might be more concerned with like money, stress, world scenarios, the possibility of accidentally creating more children, all of those things. Whereas 2s, 3s, and 4s might be more in tune with like how partners are feeling and those kinds of issues, like hard issues.
Yes, I think so a little bit. I did actually in my study run some hypotheses on center of intelligence, and it wasn't coming out as being statistically significant as an influencer on sexuality itself.
Interesting.
But now that you mention it, and just in working with clients, there is a little bit of a bent that direction, where, for example, our self-preservation 4 will be really distracted by the feelings they have about what was happening at work that day. And, a self-preservation 5 more about finances, and a self-preservation 9 more about their body being uncomfortable. So I think there is something to that, but I don't have hard data on it.
Love the descriptive language of most difficult. Do you get into prescription on this front? Or like in terms of when talking to people about their sex lives, is it going to be, look, this is going to be a challenge for you, versus like this is how one ought to be sexual in the world? You see where I'm going there?
I don't.
One that I want to just talk about what's the right thing to do here. Like data is a foreign concept for me.
We're so different.
Hotness. Oh, I have a 5 child. I am aware of, in terms of the challenges then for self-pres sorts. Say it is the case that intimacy is something that's desired intellectually by somebody who finds that they're dominantly self-pres in their instinct, and they do see the boundaries that you're describing. Do you have best practices for moving past that, or is that even? I mean, I suppose if they desire it, then you could talk about best practices. Yeah.
100%. Yes. Yeah. That's sort of what I coach on most often. So just as an example for the self-presence, we're talking about them. If they're kind of like, no, I really would like to behave sexually more with my partner, or more often it's the partner that's kind of bringing them in. I just can't. I just can't get there. The number one thing to do is reduce stress for them as much as is humanly possible. Obviously, we can't always do that. The partner taking over some of their responsibilities often really helps their libido to have more space. And just learning this framework in general tends to have people dropping the kind of shame and blame that we all have around sexuality, because it's such a complicated topic. So learning and accepting themselves, first of all, but then it's literally often a case of straightforward stress reduction. And another thing that Lindsay and I both talk about is this sort of self-pres desire bounce back that happens for older self-preservation people who have, for example, an empty nest, their children have moved out, they're retired, or their careers are winding down. And suddenly they find themselves like having this sexual awakening. And often in the Enneagram language, they'll say, oh, maybe I was sexual instinct dominant all along. It's like, no, you weren't. You didn't have any space for your sexuality to thrive because you had so many contexts, and now those have decreased.
Last question for me on this. Is there evolutionary value in your mind to self-pres instinct?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I almost forgot to say it. And it's like the most essential thing about this topic. There's evolutionary value of all 3 of the instincts. And I really believe, and I see in my work, that the reason there's these 3 ways of being sexual, in addition to nine other ways of being sexual, is that it helped the human species survive and evolve. So for self-preservation, instinct dominant people, we needed, if you imagine ancient humans, cave people, we needed people who were saying, I'm not going to have sex until we have hunted and gathered enough food. If we do, we're likely to all starve to death and we would die out as a species. So without, self-preservation individuals, there would be a lot more, I'd say, irresponsible sexual behavior happening. And that's even true in the modern world. Like self-preservation dominants, more or less as a stereotype, are the least likely to do sexually irresponsible behavior as relates to unwanted pregnancy, STIs, and things like that. They really have a handle on that, which is important in the modern world. So I think the evolutionary function really was this sort of, we have to be energy efficient with how we propagate the species. That's what Lindsay and I teach, because if not, we might starve to death. And it sounds silly, but I think it really was important.
I'm immediately thinking of the movie Idiocracy. And like the whole premise of the movie is that like that these 2 people accidentally travel forward in time 1,000 years. And the thing that happened is that everyone who was, I'll just say, smart enough to think responsibly about having children didn't have children, and everyone who was dumb enough not to think responsibly about children had multiple children, and so the world gets overpopulated with idiots and things go really, really badly. And like that sounds a bit like that idea is actually rooted in the reality of the human existence for all of our time. Is that like instinctually, evolutionarily speaking, there is something in a lot of us that says, you know what, it's probably not a good idea to continue propagating our species in these settings. Like we should hold on. Maybe we shouldn't overpopulate the planet when our resources are limited. All of those things.
That makes me think that we might be breeding out self-preservation dominance by accident. I hope not.
Guess we'll find out, right?
Evolution will fix it, apparently. Had a question on gender and sexuality. This is a total assumption, but you'll come with the data. My assumption is that males have a stronger sex drive or desire for sex than females. Am I wrong in saying that? And how would that affect being self-pres here?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. There's some truth to that, especially in younger people, kind of based on hormones. Mm-hmm. But it's actually less true than most people think. In sex therapy and coaching, you get desire discrepancy, meaning one partner has a higher desire for sex than the other. That's one of the main issues people present with, and it's just as often the male who is the lower desire partner. It's just so much less frequently discussed in culture. So yes, there is some truth to like a sex or gender difference, again, especially in younger people with hormones, but because of hormones rather. But I'd say it's much less than people think. The way that's relevant to what we're talking about now is that sometimes we see self-preservation males who see sex, or kind of like the physical release of sex, as one of the primary needs of the body, along with food, water, shelter. And in those cases, it's more frequently males who see that, male self-preservation dominants who see it that way. And in those cases, they would be a little more likely to actualize the desire, but they are still extremely energy conscious about how much energy they devote to sexuality. So they might be like, okay, I'll move into relational sex, kind of get my needs met. And if that's not there, I might take care of it on my own, but I'm still not really wanting to give lots and lots of time and energy to connected sexuality because I'm still energy conscious. There's a lot of nuance to all of it.
Is there something to be said about gender on these fronts in terms of how biological sex affects motive and behavior here? I'm hearing in that language, obviously, that the way that sexuality is interpreted for a self-pres male would be, I need to experience this as part of the basic needs, whereas a self-pres female may be far more conscious of the reproductive consequences. Is that what I'm hearing there?
I don't think so. No, I don't think that self-pres males wouldn't be worried about the consequences. I think all self-preservation people are quite attuned to the consequences.
Would that not shift them more into thinking socially as opposed to thinking self-preservingly?
I'm confused.
My social instincts, I assume, would be about the tribe or about the individuals in front of me, whereas the self-pres instinct would primarily be focused on one's self, correct?
Yeah.
Is it the case that, like, I can imagine somebody who is self-pres not caring at all about their offspring, if they can forego the consequences, and their behavior would reflect that?
I see. I think they do care because they can forego the consequences. In at least the modern world, if we were actually just primates and they could like just walk away from their children forever, maybe. But I think because having offspring would be a huge output of resources, that's actually a significant concern for all self-preservation people.
I know a lot of men, in theory, not like personally.
You know of them.
I know of men who that's not really a thing for them. Am I wrong in saying that?
I would guess that has less to do with instinct and more to do with
where else does it come from?
Whether or not they're a good person.
It comes from somewhere, though, yeah?
I have no idea, but I can tell you that people who have a lot of unwanted pregnancies are typically sexual dominant. And I should say unplanned rather than unwanted. People who have unplanned pregnancies are much more likely to be sexual dominant, in my experience. We can talk about why if you want. I don't know.
If you think there's something interesting to say there, please do. But I can move forward. That you answered my question, so
maybe a good opportunity to move to sexual instinct too.
Yeah, totally.
What are the gifts of those who have a sexually dominant instinct?
Let's do that.
Sam?
I'll kind of walk back into that question we were just addressing. But the biggest gift of sexual dominance is their passion. They really do feel it. They really do feel that pull and that intensity and that desire to merge and connect, that it's more important than anything else. And they'll show it, so if you're partnered with a sexual dominant, they will make you, feel like you matter more than anything. And they really feel that way. And they will make you feel like having sex with you is more important to them than anything. And they really do feel that way. And, it's like the stuff that poetry is written about. I mean, it's passionate, intense, and connected.
Teach. There is a literal physical barrier in place when a person wears a condom during sex, right? And the risk of consequences without a condom is much more overcomable, is much less concerning to someone with that sexual instinct. Like, we talk about risk with the sexual instinct, right? And so here we see like self-preservation types are not as interested in that risk. Like they're more concerned about the risk than they are about the connection. And you get into this sexual dominance and it's much more about the connection and the intensity of the moment, and the risk is less of a concern than it would be for a self-preservation.
For sure. That's true. So I guess that takes us directly to the challenge, which is that there's some short-sightedness and a tendency to follow the passion of the moment over and above the regulatory concerns of being alive. Like, let's not create offspring if we don't want them, those kinds of things. Those tend to go on the back burner. We often find sexual dominants, will get married multiple times because they really feel that person is the person and they're really so sure about it, and they'll be with them for a while till that passion burns out and then go with someone else. Like I said, you can see there's a higher rate in my understanding of unplanned pregnancies and things like that with sexual dominance. So that's the challenge. And then the kind of flip side of that, the evolutionary meaning, the evolutionary function of sexual dominance is almost the reverse of self-preservation, which self-preservation is we had to be energy efficient and safe and have enough to eat before we propagate. For sexual dominance, it's the opposite. It's we needed to still reproduce even in times of famine and hardship where we never could have enough, no matter how much we tried. If it was self-preservation, instinct dominant people only, we would have died out then because they would have been, we can't have sex until we have enough and we'll never have enough. So actually that evolutionary function is just as important.
I want to circle back to strengths briefly. The sexuality is not just going to be physical, as we mentioned. There's also the emotional vulnerability that it seems that those who have a bonding sexual instinct provide into spaces of intimacy as a strength that those who are sexually dominant are willing to, as we said, make the risk of self-exposure. In the emotional sphere, it's not just naked and it's not just procreative acts.
Yeah.
I'm saying that more as a statement and not as a question, but I assume it's the case that emotional vulnerability is incredibly valuable in sexual connection.
Yeah, for sure. For sexual dominance, it's about, sex is more psychic. It's more about the spirit, the merging into oneness or ecstatic states. And that is a really valuable aspect of sexuality that sexual dominance can kind of help partners who aren't sexual dominant gain access to.
Right.
It also makes me think of the level of openness to sexual experience. Like, we're all aware that there is a tremendous spectrum of people, from like people who don't ever want to have sex to people who will do any sexual activity under the sun. And lots of people, like, we all were around when 50 Shades of Grey turned a tremendous amount of the populace into BDSM people, right? And a big part of that is because they had never explored that before.
Is there data on that?
Why, yes, there is.
Are you aware of the data on that?
Yeah, there is data on it.
But a large part of it is because it brought this sort of taboo idea into the mainstream, and more people were open to trying it. And I think that within the sexual instinct, you have a natural inclination to be more open to trying new things, to be willing to explore sexually without some of the, like, there's still going to be like societal hang-ups and religious upbringing is a factor, certainly, but there, within that sexual instinct, there is a willingness to try things, to risk doing something that you won't like, because maybe you will like it, right? Does that fit with your research?
Mostly, yes. For type comes in here, and there's types that are much more likely to try things, like 7s. Actually, surprisingly, 6s, as long as they are prepared in advance, they'll kind of try anything. 8s, 4s, and there's types that'll be a little more hesitant. But overall, sexual instinct dominants are they're the most likely of the instincts to be into alternative sexualities like BDSM and kink. And then we have types that are more likely to be into that, such as 8s and 4s. Basically, just because what they want is to be in that merged state that sexuality brings, and they don't really mind how they get there.
Yeah.
Bing. Any other words on the challenges for sexual bonding types?
I can't say much. People sometimes describe us as too much, too intense, overwhelming, coming on too strong, etc.
Both in terms of intimacy, but in terms of just practical relationships as well.
Yes.
Right.
And that's
truth.
That's all around the circle?
Yeah. I mean, if you had like a self-preservation 8 might look at a sexual 8 as being a little like, why are they coming on too strong? But type is obviously going to be super important to that. Like a sexual 9 probably is not going to bother a self-preservation 8 by coming on too strong.
Sure. Right. Okay.
Bing.
Yeah.
Social instincts. What are the gifts of those who are dominant social instincts?
Okay, so that would really be around the tending, tending to the relationship, attending to the sexual relationship, because these people are really in tune with the bond. So the bond with their partner, bonding in general, is really important to them. But they'll sort of track if anything is off in the sexuality and attend to it immediately. They'll notice if they're not connecting sexually as much as usual, and check in, is anything off, and if so, let's fix it. So that's one of their strengths. And I'd say their other big strength is selflessness. Social dominants are the most likely to provide sex if they're not in the mood. Lindsay Fraser, she calls it service sex. Like, not in a bad way. They don't mind. They sort of enjoy it. But it's if me having sex with my partner is going to make them happy and less irritable, less cranky, and they're going to be in a better mood. And because of that, everyone's going to have a better day. If we even maybe have kids, their whole family's going to have a better day because they're in a better mood. Social instinct dominants are really happy to provide that. And they don't usually build resentment around it. They really are happy to, and they are really quite selfless. And they are really good at following the partner's lead and tuning into what they need and kind of going with their flow.
Can you speak to the evolutionary value of the social instinct in sex just a little bit more?
Totally. So this one's kind of a little harder for some people to comprehend because we don't live in tribes as much in the modern world. But the evolutionary function there is that sex is about the cohesion and bonding of the tribe. So yes, in certain parts of human history and different tribes, sex could be sort of traded as a way of bonding the tribe. But also, just sort of the ancient version of what I just shared is sexuality as a way to help the pair bonds within the tribe, so that the tribe could be stronger because the pair bonds were stronger and people were happier. And so this is, it's like a little bit more nuanced, and again, it's harder for our modern brains to get it, but it really was about making sure, one of the tools to make sure that the tribe was strong. And we actually find that in the modern days, the social instinct dominant people are the best at polyamory. All the different instincts might have equal desire to try it or do it, or might do it at the same rates, but social instinct dominants have the least jealousy. They tend to have the least jealousy and be able to manage multiple sexual relationships at a time without having a lot of problems. And I think that's sort of because of the evolutionary antecedents of that instinct.
Did you see Shogun by chance?
No.
It's worth watching on some of these fronts in terms of sexuality used for the good of the tribe. By the way, Shogun's amazing and not prescriptive at all.
Okay, I'm writing it down.
But it's certainly the case that an exemplification of the principle at hand is all over that. It's certainly part of the dynamics.
Well, I'm glad you brought up polyamory, because I would guess that there are a lot of people within the community of there is only one right way to have a family and this is what society needs. I would guess that there is some of that social instinct regarding sexuality.
I'm not sure about that, but I will say that for our modern day, the nuclear family is our modern day tribe. So social instinct dominants tend to have a lot of their attention going to the bonds in the nuclear family as the modern day tribe. I don't know, rightly or wrongly, or if they think much about it, but
sure.
Well, this might be a good transition into thinking about combinations. But if, for example, you have a couple where, let's say, they're both self-preservation dominant and they both have a hard time moving through context and they're both okay with that, there's nothing to work on because they're happy. They're totally fine.
Right.
And something Lindsay talks about is that they only will show up in sex therapy in her office, for example, because they're looking at culture and they're saying, well, culture says we're supposed to be having sex at least once a week or so if we're, a connected couple. And she's like, well, how often do you want to be having it? How often do you want to be having it? And if they're on the same page, there's no issue because there's no issue with their happiness. So I think you're onto something that ultimately we want to get people to basically just be satisfied. It doesn't matter if it looks like what other people are doing or if it looks like what they've heard people should be doing.
That's exactly what I was pointing at. Which seems to me a right and good target for the study. So I'm a big fan of happiness. Let's talk about combinations. What comes to your mind when you think about combinations then on these fronts?
So many things. One thing that's kind of simple is same dominant instinct usually means they're on the same page about sex. They may not be on the same page about anything else or most other things, but usually they're relatively on the same page about sex and what it means to them, even if they're different types, with some exceptions. I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, you're going to have like cold couples and hot couples and warm couples, as it were.
Exactly. Self-preservation and sexual instinct dominant. So one person self-pres, one person sexual. That's really extremely common. And that's the pairing that Lindsay in her sex therapy practice and myself in my coaching practice see most frequently. Not to make those people panic and think that anything is going to go wrong. It's a great pairing. It's just that you can imagine from when I was describing kind of the evolutionary functions of self-preservation and sexual that they're opposite. So people have in those couples a lot of work to do around understanding each other and meeting in the middle, where the sexual instinct dominant tends to feel rejected a lot and the self-preservation dominant tends to feel like pulled a lot, like too much is being asked of them.
Well, you can see that, like we talk about that and acknowledge this issue as like within relationships already. Like in the beginning of relationships, it's a lot easier to be much more intimate, and then as time goes on, things ebb and flow, right? And the self-preservation type is going to be cognizant of that and in tune with it and okay with it, while the sexual type is not necessarily going to be in tune with that context and to not be interested in that context. And so as time goes on, it probably becomes harder if they're not aware of it, not discussing it. As time goes on, there is context in relationship, and the sexual partner is wanting more than just the context.
Interesting you bring that up too, because another thing to note is that everyone has their sexual instinct activated in the beginning of a relationship. That sort of honeymoon phase, as it were, where we tend to have a lot more sex. It's every instinct having the sexual instinct activated. And then after the first 9 months to a year and a half, 2 years, when that returns to baseline, it does not return to baseline for sexual instinct dominance. They stay at that level all the time.
Yeah.
And for social and self-pres, it returns to baseline, and they usually feel, especially self-pres, but both, they usually feel a lot better. Like, okay, things feel normal again. And then the sexual instinct dominant partner is like, what happened to that amazing connection we had in the beginning? And they can spend their whole life chasing that back with that same person. Yeah. And then, like you said, TJ, contexts increase. They tend to over the life of a relationship. And our sexual instinct dominance, one of their gifts that I forgot to mention is that they have an enormously easy time pushing through contexts comparatively. They keep pushing through the context being like, okay, we have young kids. Okay, we have busy jobs. Like, why are we just have sex anyway? And the self-preservation partner is like, I really want to, but I just can't. And, that's when you tend to present in therapy or coaching.
True.
Talk about just can't on that front. I assume that's a mental block, and would you say that that's coming out of motive? Is that coming out? That's coming out of the list of obstacles that being self-pres naturally throw forth? How would you talk about that?
I think so, because if you have a social in that situation, you see much less difficulty. I see much less difficulty in social sexual couples because the social instinct person might be really stressed out, but they're like, well, there's where service sex comes in. Okay, well, my partner wants to do it. I know that's important to them. I'm just gonna push through, and that's okay with me. I think for the self-preservation person, it comes from this survival instinct and this earlier part of the brain that's associated with instincts, where they essentially feel like everyone will die if they don't attend to the self-pres needs. And it is that deep for them. So you can't just say like, oh, just do it anyway, because it feels unsafe to them.
Mm. So our theory on instincts goes along with your observation that in our view, the instincts are much more like gears in a car that you shift into and that you feel very comfortable in at times. But I would imagine, for example, that say a woman who has a dominant sexual instinct for the first 40 years of her life begins to have some sort of issues later in life that really affect how she sees herself, her body, and her ability to connect with others, that may be a shift into a self-preserving space, or a male who has erectile dysfunction of some sort, that the shift may take place. Do you see people that you work with shifting into different instincts as they grow older and as life happens and the rest?
Yes and no. I think a lot of, for example, postmenopausal women I've talked to will say, oh, maybe I was self-pres all along. They'll embody a lot more self-preservation. What about me, my needs? But ultimately, they are kind of not putting on, but they're embodying more of a self-preservation space. But I still see that like essential evolutionary self is there. So sexual instinct dominant women in that space are still sexual instinct dominant in my experience, but they are embodying more self-preservation. Same with, people who just when they have children, they'll embody more of a self-preservation space. If there's an illness, like I said, in early relationships, everyone tends to embody a sexual instinct space. My view on instincts, controversial though it may be, is that we have more or less evolved. We're sort of born with one that really is the dominant one for our whole life, but that we can shift in and out of the other one circumstantially.
It's good language.
Yeah.
Shifting is good language.
Of course you would think it was good language. You just talked about gears in a car. Well, okay, so to add another slight wrinkle to this same idea, like I personally, I believe that there is a lot more movement within the social instincts, and I like this idea of like one is dominant, but as we grow, we learn to shift into the others more. But so like I think that I am much more self-preservation. I see the other instincts play out a lot in my life, so I think there's a lot of fluidity, but I think if I had to pick one, self-preservation is probably accurate. Within my own personal sexual life, I would probably lean more, especially after this conversation, I'd probably lean more toward me being like my sexual life is much more in that sexual instinct, except that I also have a chronic pain disease. So I literally have like there is a literal physical barrier to me engaging in sexual activity often, and that self-preservation side of it is part of what is pulling the shots in those scenarios. So even within my own sex life with my partner, we've been together for 15 years. We don't have sex with other people, but there is still some movement within our own relationship of sometimes my sexual instinct is higher. And I think that's where I would normally call home within the bedroom, if you will. But my self-preservation speaks up a lot because of my physical condition. So I'm just wondering about like movement within individuals just based on circumstances.
I think that's such a good thing to bring up, and thanks for sharing, like your personal experience. It is possible, like just another theory or another way of looking at it is possible that you're sort of sexual instinct dominant evolutionarily, but because
Mm-hmm.
of your health situation, you've had to become much more
Sure.
self-preservation.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to your sexual life, like all of us, a lot of um, unenculturated aspects of the self come out in sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
then you're feeling it more. So there can be kind of maybe like a trauma adaptation where we become more like a different instinct for really ongoingly because we sort of have to.
Also, that's still entirely not even bringing up whatever religious issues around sex have existed for my entire life into my and started to change and evolve in my 20s when I started having sex, right? Like that is just an entirely other wrinkle that affects the whole thing.
There's so many of those, yeah.
I haven't heard of this. There's religious issues around human sexuality.
Yes.
I need to Google that.
No, not me.
This brings up the opposite, and you mentioned this briefly, but there we have dominant instincts, but we also have, in theory, a repressed instinct. And that would, in essence, as we're talking through this, there is the mirror for each of these. If there's sexually dominant people who have you will see the energy there. But if it's the case that somebody has a repressed sexual instinct, I imagine that same energy would then be marked at the lowest level, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And can you talk about repressed instincts and what you see there?
So, like I was saying earlier, the same dominant instinct tend to be on the same page about sex. That's especially true if it's the same instinctual stacking, meaning to say same dominant and same repressed. Then they really tend to be on the same page. When it comes to having the same blind or repressed instinct, they're on the same page, like mostly or partially. So it's definitely another layer of nuance. I could talk maybe briefly about each repressed instinct and how it relates to sexuality or how it shows up in sexuality, if that helps to clarify.
That works great. Let's start with those who are socially repressed. Like where do you see that then influencing their behavior?
The sexuality with the social repressed is kind of this idea of, oh, maybe I could have more sex if I was more empathetic, if I was more tuned in to my partner and what they need and want. This like social repressed people kind of often are missing that attentiveness that I talked about social instinct dominance having, that attending to the partner, that attending to the subtle cues that the partner is giving to initiate sex, for instance, or within a sexual experience, the subtle cues they're giving. Social instinct dominance really, social instinct repressed people tend to miss those. And they tend not to understand that a partner wants totally different things than they themselves want, and that's okay. So either they'll assume a partner wants the same thing as them, and this is going to be influenced by type. All of this is. So if we have a social repressed 8, they're going to assume that their partner wants, for example, really intense and fast touch and not probably check and not probably read any kind of subtlety about the partner not liking that. So that's really missing. And they don't necessarily hold space for the partner. So basically everything the social instinct does well in bed, that give and take, that being really tuned in and following the flow, our social instinct repressed people are not going to do that well. So partners will kind of report that they sort of lack empathy in the bedroom.
Do you see that on the like their partners are saying that my socially repressed partner?
Yeah. No, the partner's saying it. They're not. They're themselves are not saying it. They don't know. They don't know. No, they do not. Not at all.
And and much more. It sounds like it's a really generous and describing like way oversimplified.
If you want to oversimplify it, yes, sure. Yeah, it could be that way.
establish this. She's about the data, TJ.
I guess self-preservation repressed next, or does it matter?
That works great. Yeah.
Okay.
What's the self-pres?
So that would be self-preservation repressed people are going to be focusing on what feels good to the instinct, to the dominant instinct, rather than what feels good to the body. So sexual instinct dominants are going to be focusing on what feels good in terms of merging, passion, intensity, socials, bonding, connection, attending to the relationship, but they're not actually attuned to what feels good or bad to their own body. That's what's really missing. Focusing on their own safety, especially when, people are younger. Physical awareness of their body's comfort is lacking. That focus on safety is lacking. Discernment can be lacking. And independence actually can be lacking because both the sexual instinct and the social instinct are quite dependent on others if you think about it. In terms of sexuality, the sexual instinct wants that merging and the social instinct wants that bonding, and both of those require another person. So there's a real lack with the self-preservation repressed person of understanding or tuning into that solo sexuality that we said, like the self-preservation dominance gift is they really understand that if they're alone on a desert island, they're still sexual. Our self-preservation repressed people kind of lack that.
You might see people who are like the type of person who is harder to set boundaries with a partner, and people who might get used in the bedroom, and it sounds like that repression is less focused on the me of the sexual experience.
Totally. I feel like you said that perfectly.
Well, lastly, those who are repressed in their sexual instinct.
Yes, so that's actually the hardest one to understand, interestingly enough, maybe because the sexual instinct is it's so amorphous, kind of. But the idea with the sexual instinct repressed person is sort of like sex is about sex. Why so much intensity? Why so much passion? Why are you trying to make it like the movies? Like, I don't want to have sex that's like the movies, What's really missing here is a buildup of sexual tension, over time, that kind of building up, a surrender or abandon to the sexual moment. Sexual instinct repressed people have a really hard time doing that. And that kind of fire or like energetic sexual energy engagement with the experience, that kind of playing with or creating sexual energy and playing back and forth with the partner. Sexual instinct repressed people just kind of can't grasp those things. For them, especially if they're also self-preservation dominant, but either way, for them, sex is just much more about the body and or the bond, not really about these kind of amorphous ideas of chemistry and passion and intensity.
That's an excellent word. Last thoughts on that, Teach?
Nope.
As you're sharing those, the repressed instinct, especially I assume in your counseling work, as I'm hearing it, seem to me to be equal to, or even perhaps more important in the sort of topics that you would be bringing up to folks. Have you seen that to be the case, that you're identifying the repressed instinct and seeing it as actually having more value with the sorts of issues somebody might bring to your table?
It's definitely not more important than the dominant instinct when you consider that the dominant instinct is a survival instinct. So it goes really deep in terms of how people view sex. But I absolutely use it just as much. Sort of the first thing I do with anyone is find their type, but also their whole instinctual stacking. So their dominant instinct and their repressed instinct. And if they're a partnered person, one of the things we spend a lot of time with is the overlap between their instinctual stacking and their partners, and what instincts they are meeting in their sexual life, and what instincts are repressed out of the relationship because they're repressed within each person.
Yeah, that's a good word. We're short on time. I would love just like your quick reflections on that middle. We've talked about dominant and repressed, but there is a third instinct that most folks have. In your experience, what has that instinct served to do, or what's its value in this conversation?
A lot of people talk about the secondary instinct as being the most balanced for people. So if speaking for myself, I'm a sexual instinct dominant, self-preservation repressed type 5. I'm leaking a lot of energy to sexual instinct concerns, and I don't have enough energy for self-preservation concerns, but I have just about the right amount of energy for social concerns, for social instinct dominant things. So I don't use this as much, but I'd say that people use their secondary instinct the right amount within their sexual life. So the attention to how often sex is happening, is it a little off? Do I need to attend to it? Do I need to attend to the partner? Should I be giving or receiving? All of that, I'm kind of not doing it too much or too little.
It's a good word. Bang. Any last thoughts before we close?
I got nothing to add.
Sam, it's been a delight meeting you and getting a chance to engage you on this. That you've been on McAllen for a long time, and I've been thinking about how is this going to go for a while, and so I do hope that we get to a chance to connect again in the future, and do keep us in mind when you're doing fun stuff if we can serve. But I'm thrilled that you made time for us. So
thanks so much for having me. It was super fun.
If folks want to get in touch with you or connected to your work, what are some of the best ways to do that?
You can find me on Instagram at Enneagasm, ENNEA_GASM. And on there, I do the Sexy First Fridays Instagram live series with Lindsay Frazier, who's a sex therapist, every first Friday of the month on Enneagram, relationship, and sexuality topics. We have a newsletter you can sign up for. My Instagram bio. You can also find all of this on my website, which is enneagramsexpert.com. And then we have, workshops. We just came out with an all-day self-paced course on all of these things, Enneagram and Sexuality for Transformed Relationships, that we're really excited about, that has CEUs. So you can find all of that stuff on my website.
Bang. Who are the people that you enjoy working with most?
Lindsay definitely is the person I work with the most. Like I said, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. So we do a lot together to bring kind of the researcher and therapist views on this topic. Most of my workshops and stuff are in combination with her. She's great. You can find her at, I think it's lindsayfrazier.com. And we also have a bunch of other colleagues that we meet with and talk about. Frederick Kuna has done some of his own qualitative research on this topic. We've collaborated with him on some of that. I think he's working on releasing some of that in his own form, maybe on YouTube. So I'd say those are the main ones.
Okay. I meant more clients. Like, who do you enjoy working with most?
Oh,
but that's a great shout out to some high quality folks. We're going to interview Lindsay in November, I think.
Perfect.
So I'm excited to talk with her as well.
I see. Okay. I really love working with everyone. I definitely have people that I am better at, that I am like naturally gifted at working with, which I would say is 8s, 5s, and 4s are kind of like my easiest and best transformations. And I love working with everybody I love working with couples, which is what I mostly work with, and helping them kind of depersonalize all the stuff that's going on. And there's so many light bulbs that go on immediately just when they learn this information.
Depersonalize is a great word as well on these fronts. So shout out. Excellent job. I'm very appreciative again of your time, and we're looking forward to connecting in the future. So TJ, you got anything else, boss?
I do want to say I am so appreciative that there are people in the world who care enough about this to do the work and to help show the rest of us true things that we've never thought of before. So very grateful for your work, excited to explore more and for more and more people to start to see themselves in these new kinds of ways that will hopefully help them grow and move forward and move together and all of those things. So
it's been so fun talking to you guys.
Yeah, ditto.
You see Jay Wilson, he's officially awesome. She's Dr. Sam Greenberg. We're cheering for your work. And I'm Jeff Cook, and who you aren't just isn't interesting.